Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Monday, November 8th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Purdue game is in 5 days. The game against Michigan in 19 days. Yes, we are down under 20. Ohio State had a closer than expected win over Nebraska on Saturday, but compared to a big chunk of the top 25, that was actually a fantastic result. 8 of the teams who were included in the first round of the college football playoff rankings lost. Several others, including number 2 Alabama and number 6 Cincinnati, had far, far closer calls than the Buckeyes. This is all setting up what sure seems like it's going to be the craziest November in the history of the college football playoff era. Today, we're going to be talking about both the Buckeyes win and just how crazy things could get in the next month or so. My guest today is Buckeye Scoop's Marc Givler. He, Bill Green, and Kevin Noon all had really, really great and detailed breakdowns of the game on our Ask the Insiders board at Buckeye Scoop over the weekend. Marc, thank you for joining me.
Great to be back. Been a little bit.
I know. I was hoping to have you on last week and had Bill Green on, which is Bill Green is always
That's better.
Not even a consolation prize. Bill is always one of my favorites as well. So, but yes, good to have you back on. Let's start with that Ohio State game. So for the second straight week, the Buckeyes really struggled to run the football and ended up settling for 4 field goals in and at least around the red zone again. So I mean, yes, they're winning, but Marc, it sure seems like on offense that was supposed to be a sure thing just a few weeks ago, and then now that offense is like anything but right now. So, what do you think the biggest issues on that offense really are right now?
Yeah, I think it's that interior of the offensive line getting a push in the running game. I think that's what's bogging them down right now. I mean, that's how you finish drives in the red zone. You have to be able to run the football in the red zone. That's how you score touchdowns. I think they're struggling there. Obviously, Paris Johnson did not have his best game against Nebraska. They and beyond just struggling to get a push. I mean, how many untimely penalties are they going to commit up front? That was an issue the last 2 weeks. So they've got to get some stuff cleaned up. I looked back at the Penn State game, and I actually thought Stroud played really well against Penn State. I didn't think he played very well, obviously, against Nebraska. So some of the things carried over from Penn State to Nebraska in terms of the inability to get a push up front. But then you kind of factor in now you go from, not getting push up front to now your quarterback's not exactly being decisive with the football and making the right decisions with the football either. And that kind of compounded, the problems that they had against Penn State. And that's what we saw against Nebraska, I think.
I do wonder if there's going to be a change up front on that offensive line somewhere. Matthew Jones has looked really good when he's been in there, and they obviously believe in him because they keep putting him in, somewhere. So I do wonder if you're going to see a change somewhere on that line at some point, or Matthew Jones maybe just continues to get more and more snaps as the season moves along. On the other side of the ball, it's like a whole different story. A month ago, everyone had written the defense off as a completely lost cause, and they just keep getting better and had, like a legitimately good game against Nebraska. They gave up a couple long plays, but played well in the red zone, and for the second week in a row, really controlled the run game. So is this defense now good enough to you to, number one, win the Big Ten, number two, make the playoff, and number three, potentially win the national title?
Yeah, I think it probably is, especially with what we saw against Nebraska. I thought that was a really good performance. Obviously, 2 explosive plays I'd like to have back. But I think the thing that's most encouraging right now is the play of the front four. The defensive line is playing extremely well, and this goes back several weeks now. I didn't love the overall defensive effort against Penn State. I don't think allowing Sean Clifford to throw for 360 yards is a particularly good performance, but even in that game, the defensive line was disruptive and really made some of the biggest plays of the game. So is the back seven going to magically turn into maybe what Ohio State had in 2019? I don't think so, but that defensive line is making enough game-changing plays that it can kind of cover up for some issues in the back seven. And, we're kind of in a different era now. The national championship game, the days of, Oklahoma winning a national championship game 10-6 or whatever that score was, back in the Stoops era, those days are over. So it's really, can you hold teams under 30 and can you force a couple of turnovers? And I think the answer to both of those questions for Ohio State defense right now is yes. I think they can hold decent offenses under 30. And I think they can force turnovers, especially the way that defensive line is playing right now.
Yeah, and you look around the rest of the country, and it's like who is like unbeatable in the country right now, and I don't know that there is an answer to that question. I mean, you can maybe say Georgia, but I don't know that Georgia stacks up with 2020 Alabama or 2019 LSU as like team that's on a completely another level. And I'm going to run through the entire top 10, or what I'm expecting to be the top 10 of the college football playoff in a minute. And we'll run through the remaining schedule, and you can tell me how many of these teams are actually going to win out, because I think we might be headed for an insane couple weeks. But before we get to that, let's start with the Buckeyes. And I mean, the next 4 weeks, I mean, let's be honest, look brutal for them. I mean, they could potentially play 4 teams in a row who end the year ranked. They've got Purdue, Michigan State, road game at Michigan, and then possibly like Wisconsin in the Big Ten title game. At this point, I mean, I don't know who else I would pick to win the Big Ten, but I also don't know if Ohio State's even 50-50 to win all 4 of those games. So what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be really tough. I think, when we look at things right now, they've, what, 4 of their top 6 opponents, I guess, are going to be this next 4 games, assuming they get to the Big Ten championship game. Yeah, I like them in every game as a one-off, but yeah, I mean, the three game parlay to get to Indianapolis or whatever, that's going to be tough. I would say yes, they're going to do that, but I don't think it's like 70 or 80% or anything like that. I think they're going to have a few nail biters here the next few weeks. And it's just, I think the one thing that we're seeing with some of these teams, though, and we're seeing it around the country, is there's not a lot of teams that are going to challenge Ohio State on both sides of the ball. I think Michigan State offensively and Purdue offensively, are those 2 teams going to be particularly tough defensively? No, I don't think so. And then kind of on the flip side with Michigan, yeah, I think Michigan's defense can cause some problems. Are they good enough offensively to be what they need to be to beat Ohio State? So I think that's maybe the one good thing they're going to have going for them, is that each week is going to be a new challenge, but it's not always. I just don't know if there's going to be a team there that really scares you on both sides of the ball.
The really interesting thing is, let's say Ohio State loses this week to Purdue. They still control their own destiny for the Big Ten championship game. And if you win the Big Ten as a 2-loss team and things go completely nuts the next month, and I think they could be, like, I think it's entirely possible Ohio State could make it into the college football playoff as a 2-loss Big Ten champion. But let's kind of show our math here. I'm going to let you tell me. So I'm going to run through the teams that are kind of, I think, likely to be the top 10 of the college football playoff rankings this week. In my mind, I think like 8 or more of them could lose at least 1 or more games before the selection show on December 5th. I'm going to let you grade each of these teams. Here's your choices: definitely winning out, probably winning out, maybe winning out, or probably not winning out, or definitely not winning out. So definitely, probably, maybe, or no. So let's start with Georgia. Georgia's number 1 at Tennessee. That one looks a little more interesting than it did a couple weeks ago. Charleston Southern, nope. At Georgia Tech, probably not. And then let's just say Alabama in the SEC championship game. Is Georgia a sure thing to win out? A probably? Where do you think?
I'm going to say probably. I'm close to definitely on that, but I'm gonna dial it back to probably. The Tennessee game is going to be interesting for me just a little bit, because Tennessee can score, and I don't. Georgia's defense is amazing. I think their offense is average. And I think, if you've run, I don't know that they've played a lot of great offenses. I mean, I think right now with Georgia, we've seen a great defense playing bad offenses. And that's what you see every week when they're, holding teams under 10 points. But Tennessee's got a chance to make some explosive plays. And I think it will give us a feel for maybe, is Georgia's defense just completely invincible, or, can you get to 24 or 28 on them, which you're going to need to be able to. So that's interesting to me. And, look, Nick Saban versus Kirby Smart. If you watch these teams the last few weeks, you definitely like Georgia in that game, but it's one of those things where you would never count out Nick Saban.
Yeah, and Alabama's up next, and New Mexico State and Arkansas. Those are probably not things we need to really worry about, but they end up at Auburn in the Iron Bowl, and then potentially Georgia in the SEC championship game. That Auburn game is not, the Iron Bowl is a little bit wonky, and sometimes you get weird results there. And I think Alabama might have lost their last couple of games in Jordan-Hare, actually. So definitely, probably, maybe, or probably not.
Yeah, I'm I'm like the 180 on Georgia. I was kind of on the cusp of definitely and kind of went down to probably. I'm on the cusp of definitely not with Nebraska or with Alabama, but I'm going to dial it back a little bit to probably not. Um, I don't really see them beating Georgia if they play. I think it's possible they could, but I don't see it. And I think Auburn certainly has a chance. I think Arkansas has a chance. Arkansas is, I think, every bit as good as LSU, who really was within an eyelash of winning that game on Saturday night. So I think they have 3 games remaining that are at least in the realm of possibility of losing. Again, do I think they're going to lose 3 more or even 2 more? Probably not. But I think they've got 3 games where they're going to have to show up, and they're kind of a mess right now. Was it 20 points against LSU with LSU's second team defense? That's at home. I mean, that's kind of alarming. They're having some issues. They couldn't run the football, which is just insane to say about Alabama. So I don't know. I think they're very vulnerable and are very probable to lose another game.
Yeah, LSU had 7 defensive starters out and gave up 6 yards rushing against Alabama. Those numbers just do not compute. I have some questions about that Alabama offensive line and facing that Georgia defensive line, unless they get some stuff fixed up and I think they had some guys maybe dinged up, but if you don't get guys back or get things straightened out, that might not go great against that Georgia defensive front. How about Oregon? One of the teams Ohio State fans have been keeping an eye on. They haven't really had to play anyone great, and they just beat Washington, and Washington is just a disaster this year. Just fired their offensive coordinator on Sunday. But they've got some interesting ones. They got Wazoo, which is playing with an interim head coach, but just beat someone a week ago. At Utah, which Utah looks like they're rounding into form and back to being Utah again. Oregon State, rivalry game, always kind of interesting. And then probably Utah again in a neutral site Pac-12 championship game. Where do you think the Ducks are right now?
Yeah, I would put them in the probably not going to run the table again, and probably very kind of close to definitely almost, but I'll dial it back into probably not. I think maybe Utah gets them in 2 weeks. I think if I'm looking at that right now, that just feels right. It's one team that's playing really well right now against another team that just is finding ways to win each week, but isn't looking pretty right now.
Yeah, Utah. I mean, I think people just kind of don't pay attention to the Pac-12, especially the unranked Pac-12 games. Utah just put Stanford in a blender on Saturday. I think it ended up 52-7 and was one of those might not have been as close as the score might have indicated. Stanford, of course, you may remember them from such games as the time they beat Oregon earlier this fall. So that'll be interesting. We talked about Ohio State, so let's move ahead to Cincinnati. I mean, this is like Luke Fickell is like Houdini getting out of these games where Navy had the ball with a chance to win at the end of the game. Tulsa had the ball 3 inches from the goal line a couple times with a chance to tie. They keep escaping. They finish at USF, home for SMU, at East Carolina, and then either Houston or SMU. It might be Houston at this point because SMU's in a little bit of a slump. Does Cincinnati get through?
I'm actually going to say probably not. I think SMU or Houston gets them, because I believe what will happen is if SMU doesn't get them, they'll play Houston. I think how that plays out. I don't have the conference standing in front of me. I can't claim to be 100% accurate in my knowledge of the divisional setup of the American Athletic Conference, but I believe what happens is if Cincinnati beats SMU, they'll play Houston. So I think one of those two will actually get them. I think they're playing with fire right now.
Yeah, and the AAC does it. They don't have divisions. It's just the top 2 teams in the conference. So
that holds up too. I think Houston's, are they undefeated in the conference right now, or did they take a loss?
Houston might have one loss, but SMU's lost a couple games in a row. Yeah. So I think it's very likely to be Dana Holgorsen in Houston, and they're another team that I think lost early, and everyone just kind of went, okay, now you don't have to think about them anymore. And then a lot like Utah, like, okay, hey, it's like the gif of the Undertaker. Kind of sneaking up behind the guy. Like that's
Houston is undefeated in the America. I just looked up 6-0.
Okay, there you go. So yes, very, very likely Houston, and they do not play Houston in the regular season. So that will be their problem a little later on. Michigan State, number 3 in the first college football playoff rankings. I hope they got a scoreboard picture while they were up there, because they're not going to be there long. They suffered the most easily identifiable in advance upset of the season at Purdue, a top 5 team going on the road to Purdue. What could possibly go wrong? David Bell was the answer to that question, and something we probably figured out after they had trouble defending Andrew Anthony against Michigan. Here's what Michigan State has left: Maryland, at Ohio State, Penn State, Wisconsin. I will also provide you the bonus answer of less than 0% chance if you would like to use that in this case.
I'll stick with definitely not. That's close enough to 0, I think. Definitely not. I don't think they'll beat Ohio State. I don't think. Oh man, maybe they can split Penn State, Wisconsin.
And Wisconsin would only be the Big Ten championship game. So
there you go. That's right.
Yeah.
So maybe they would. They beat Penn State. That's gonna be an interesting game. I think that's kind of strength on strength and weakness on weakness. Actually, that could be fascinating. But yeah, I don't. No, they're not winning out.
Yeah, that could be a big game for Jahan Dotson. Is kind of what I'm thinking. Oklahoma is undefeated and got zero love whatsoever from the committee. They had one of the best weeks of any top 10 team. That's because they didn't play. So that was a good week to sit out and just watch the blood flow everywhere else in the top 10. Here's what they finished with, though. It is about to get real for Oklahoma. At Baylor, home for Iowa State, at Oklahoma State, and then depending on how the tiebreakers all sort out, probably one of those three teams again in the Big 12 championship game. They did the same thing where it's the top two. So It's going to be Oklahoma and someone, and probably one of those three teams. So are they going to be able to beat those, win those 4 games in a row?
I think probably not. I still don't. Their defense is better. I don't know that I trust it though. They've played some alarmingly close games against some alarmingly bad teams. It just feels like, as well as Caleb Williams has played, again, true freshman quarterback, you're going to get one game out of him where it just doesn't click and he turns it over, makes a couple freshman mistakes. And I think that, with what they have coming up, those are the types of games that he's not going to be able to afford that. I think you can afford that against Kansas or someone like that. But with what they've got coming up down the stretch, I don't know if he has his freshman moment, if that may be fatal. So I would say probably not. They'll be favored in all of them, I think, but it just doesn't look like a team that's going to go 13-0. It just doesn't.
Well, this is one of these things where math catches up with you. Even if you're like 60% likely to win 4 games in a row, 60% times 60%, well, you're only 36% likely to win just 2 of those games, and you got to play another 2. So 36.36 times 0.36, you guys can do that math at home, but it's probably a little shy of 15%. So that's those are not great odds. Michigan is next. They get a real one this weekend at Penn State. They kind of took care of business against Indiana. We do this Michigan Monday Buckeye Scoop or Buckeye Weekly podcast every week with Tony Gerdeman. And I said to him, we were talking after we did our Sunday show, and it's like, we watch Michigan every week. We watch every snap of every Michigan game every week. It's early November, and I feel like I have learned nothing about Michigan, because it's just like, well, they're okay, and they beat all these teams. But you look at what they did against Rutgers or what they did against Indiana compared to what Ohio State did against those teams. And it's like, are they just kind of like just doing the old Milton Berle, just pulling out enough to win? Or is this just what they are and they can't do more than that? So here's Michigan: at Penn State, at Maryland, Ohio State. And then if they do get through all 3 of those, and they would probably need to win all 3 in order to have the tiebreaker over everyone, then, potentially Wisconsin, the Big Ten championship game. Can they run those 4 games?
No, I don't. I would say, God. Again, I'm on the verge of definitely not here. I could maybe walk it back to probably not if I'm scared of, freezing cold takes or something, but I don't see it. I don't see I think their best bet is splitting Penn State and Ohio State. So I don't even, let alone getting to the Big Ten championship and winning 4 in a row. I think they've got at least 1 coming in the next 3 and possibly even 2.
And if they beat Ohio State, and that's Ohio State's only loss, Ohio State probably still goes to the Big Ten championship. They would at that point, because Michigan would have 2 conference losses and Ohio State would have only 1, and they would have beaten everyone else in the division. So so at that point, Ohio State would still go to the Big Ten championship game. So, oh man, wouldn't that be fun if Michigan beat Ohio State, And then Ohio State ended up going to the Big Ten championship game and ended up getting into the college football playoff anyway, because it was just a complete bloodbath everywhere. I'm sure that would go over great in Ann Arbor. I'm going to skip the number 9 team right now, because I think they're maybe the most interesting part of this exercise. We're going to skip ahead to maybe number 10-ish. And this, you could say Oklahoma State, whatever, but Texas A&M. Let's talk about Texas A&M, because they got 2 losses already, but they have a win over Alabama. And, is the win over Alabama the skeleton key that gets you into the college football playoff? Here's how they finish: at Ole Miss, Prairie View, at LSU, and then Georgia. So obviously they would have to run those 4 in order to get into the playoff. You're not getting in as a 3-loss division champion if they lose to Georgia. And I mean, you can share your thoughts on how likely it is that they actually run those 4 games. But if they do, you can see Kirk Herbstreit making an impassioned case for them on that Saturday night college football final after the championship games. So Texas A&M, at Ole Miss, Prairie View, at LSU, and then potentially Georgia. How likely is that?
Yeah, I'm at probably not. And again, I'm close to definitely not, because they are so, despite that win over Alabama and despite the momentum that people are giving them right now, they are very, very offensively challenged. And in fact, I'm not convinced they're going to beat Ole Miss, because Ole Miss does have firepower. And to beat Ole Miss, you're probably gonna have to get into the 30s. Can Texas A&M get into the 30s against Ole Miss? I don't know. And then certainly, would they score against Georgia? I mean, I don't. Would they cross midfield against Georgia? I mean, this team scored 10 points against Colorado. So I think they're just too offensively challenged, and I think they'll probably lose a game here in the next few weeks. LSU's kind of a mess themselves, so maybe they can win at LSU, but I think Ole Miss is going to get them.
I kind of lean that way as well. Just one of those teams where you got to have enough offense to keep up with Ole Miss, and I think Ole Miss is going to score. Ole Miss probably gets to at least 28-35 against them, and I don't know if Texas A&M can do that, because they needed a defensive score to get to 20 or 24 against Auburn last weekend. So probably not. Now, I think we've only had one team that was even close to more than 50-50 at this point, and that was Georgia. Okay, here's the last one, number 9, and oh man, get ready for everyone to just go, no, when I read through this schedule. Ready? Old Notre Dame. Ready? Here's who Notre Dame has left: at Virginia, Georgia Tech, at Stanford. Mark, how likely is it that Notre Dame runs the table over the last 3 games and then does not play in a conference championship game? So they finish 11-1.
And I think it's probable. I think it's probable. I think, God, is Virginia the last hope here? I mean, I don't. Man, what a bad schedule. Is their schedule better than Cincinnati's schedule?
Probably not.
Especially if you give Cincinnati like that extra game against Houston at the end. Like, is Notre Dame's schedule worse than Cincinnati's?
Yeah, I mean, that they have. I'll pull it up right now, the full schedule, but they had they have the thing where they play all the ACC teams every year. So that's half of their schedule. And the entire ACC is garbage this year. And
they didn't play many of the good teams even in the league this year.
No, they did not.
They didn't.
No, yeah, they didn't. I mean, they didn't play Pitt. They didn't play Clemson. I mean, and then, we're talking.
Did they play NC State?
They did not play Wake. They didn't play NC State. I think
aren't those the 4 best teams in the conference?
Yeah, I think that.
Why are they playing this ACC thing? They're not even playing any of the good teams in the league.
Yeah, they. Well, I mean, how we're talking about how they might make the college football playoff. That's why. I mean, it's working out great for them. But they didn't play Wake. I mean, they did. I think they played Virginia Tech. They played North Carolina earlier. I mean, but they're not playing anyone great, and they just played Navy, and this is a down year for Navy. I mean, it's just Stanford is bad, USC is bad. Like, it's not like they were intentionally dodging people. I mean, they beat Florida State in overtime. Mm-hmm. They beat Toledo by 3. Mm-hmm. They beat Purdue 27-13. They beat Wisconsin 41-13. So the 2 Big Ten teams are kind of the case for them right now. So if Purdue finishes ranked, if Wisconsin finishes ranked, okay, there's 2 wins. Cincinnati, they lost 24-13. They were down 17 zip in the first half. That game was not super competitive. At Virginia Tech, they win by 3. USC, they win by 15. North Carolina, they win by 10. Navy, they win 34-6. That's it. Like that's the thing. And, if you did not watch that Wisconsin game, it's like 41-13. Wow, they killed Wisconsin. I mean, that game was Wisconsin 13, Notre Dame 10 in the early part of the fourth quarter until Notre Dame ran back a kickoff and then had a couple pick sixes to completely change the result. I mean, I think we need to sort of prepare. Everyone needs to sort of prepare themselves for, Georgia 30, Notre Dame 3 in the Orange Bowl. As I was going through this whole exercise, getting ready for the episode, I was like, oh man, we're going to have to waste another New Year's Eve watching Notre Dame get clubbed into, stuffed into a sack and dropped off a bridge. Like, how do we keep doing this?
Notre Dame, how would you put them in over like 2-loss Alabama, 2-loss Big Ten champion Ohio State, or really any 2-loss Big Ten champion for that matter? Could you put them in over? Could you put them in over 1-loss Big 12 champion Oklahoma? I don't.
Maybe. I mean, Oklahoma. Yeah, Oklahoma at that point would have added 3. A one-loss Big 12 champion Oklahoma would have added 3 pretty good wins to their resume, and only 1 loss, and they're already ahead of Notre Dame. So maybe, and if Cincinnati is a unbeaten or a 1-loss team, they have a head-to-head over Notre Dame.
Doesn't Cincinnati have to lose twice?
Maybe.
My instinct is that Cincinnati does not have to lose twice. My instinct is that if Cincinnati loses once, they'll put Notre Dame ahead of them. That would be absolutely ridiculous. But I think that's probably how it would play out. It's not how I would personally have it play out. But
yeah,
it just feels like there's so many roadblocks there for Notre Dame. But
yeah, with Cincinnati and Notre Dame and Ohio State and Oregon, you've got a couple teams where it's like, you've got the head-to-head, and then the team that lost the head-to-head might end up with the same record against a better schedule than the other team. And, that's going to be, there are going to be a lot of very interesting conversations. And, the real interesting part of that is the team that lost both of those head-to-heads is a far bigger TV draw, which I'm sure the College Football Playoff Committee won't take into account at all in their decision-making. So it should be fine for both of those teams. But yeah, I just was looking through this, and as I was thinking about, what we wanted to do for today's show, and I was like, oh man, this month could be insane. I mean, that you could have, this could be, you go back to 2007 when it was like this week that Ohio State lost to Illinois at home and was out of the college football playoff, or out of the college football championship, BCS championship conversation almost entirely. And then 3 weeks later or 4 weeks later, they're not only in the 2-team championship game, they're the number 1 seed. And this is, we keep comparing this to 2007. I don't know that there are great teams this year, but man, there are some really interesting teams this year. And I'm thinking this might be a really, really fun couple of weeks of college football.
Yeah, I think we're going to see all sorts of upsets. I think we're going to see a lot of teams drop games. And I put out a tweet. It might have been week 1. It was definitely at the latest, it was week 2. And I just said, I know this is an overreaction right now, but this just feels like a two-loss playoff team season. This feels like the year that a 2-loss team gets in. And looking at the landscape right now, I still think that's very, very possible.
Here's my hot take. It's more likely that there are 2 2-loss playoff teams this year than 0 2-loss playoff teams. That's a little bit of a hot take, but you go through those lists and it's like, well, maybe it's not quite as crazy as it sounds.
If Ohio State loses a game in November, if Oregon loses a game in November,
Alabama loses again. Yeah.
Right. And if Cincinnati loses a game, because that may just punt them to the moon at that point in the eyes of the committee, you're just about there, I think, because let's assume Alabama is going to lose somewhere, whether it's Georgia in the SEC championship game or somewhere else along the line. You're pretty much there, I think, at that point. I mean,
if Oklahoma wins out or loses only once, and if Notre Dame wins out, like, sure, absolutely possible. You might only have one. You could have none, but I mean, with 4 weeks to go, this is about as wide open as I can remember a college football season in a long, long time. I mean, you go back and you listen to everyone talking preseason about, well, if you give me, and I remember saying this sentence, if you give me these 5 teams, I will guarantee you that these, 4 of these teams are going to be in the college football playoff field, and 4 of these 5. And it's like, boy, there might not be more than 1 or 2 of those teams in the college football playoff field, depending on how the next few weeks shake out. So should be a fun time and to be following college football. And if you want to follow college football and follow the Ohio State Buckeyes, great place to do that is buckeyescoop.com. We have a ton of great podcasts. We've got a ton of great content. As I mentioned off the top, Marc and Bill and Kevin all had some really good insight and analysis on the Buckeyes game against Nebraska, what it might mean moving forward. Tony Gerdeman had a good piece on the Ohio State run game on Sunday, and we'll have much more coverage this week heading into what is a suddenly very, very interesting game against Purdue. And you can follow along with all of our podcasts. You can find those wherever you get this show: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify. Just search Buckeye Scoop to find all of those. And then also check out our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. Hit the bell there. You get to subscribe to our channel. Then you get notified every time we post a new video, every time we post a new podcast, every time we do a live pregame show, postgame show, all that good stuff. It's all free at youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.